Okay. Now, I might be kind of impressed if somebody can remember this. I think you guys are starting to get it with the indentured servants comment. I was really impressed with that. Now, I want you to think about this. We're talking about colonizing the Carolinas. And we're talking about like 1640s. Because we kind of go back and forth because we're taking these by section, but that doesn't mean people settled in that chronological order. Does that make sense? So what was going on in 1640 in England that might affect the colonization of the Carolinas? If somebody gets this, I'm really going to be proud. 1640 in London. What was going on in England about this time? Whoa! Woofington! A civil war. And what happened in the Civil War? Somebody got their head chopped off. Who was it? King Charles? First. But I am kind of impressed. So here we go. Now, I want you to remember as we get into colonizing the Carolinas that colonization in English America was interrupted during this time because that Civil War in the 1640s resulted in King Charles I being beheaded. And who led England for nearly 10 years afterwards? I'd really be impressed.
Wasn't it just Parliament?
No?
No, it was a...
Oliver Cromwell, my God! Oliver Cromwell. So, we're going to move up here and we're going to kind of talk about this colonizing the Carolinas. In 1660, the throne of England was restored to a king rather than Oliver Cromwell, and it was King Charles II, who was the son of King Charles I. Yeah?
So on the test, I got -1 for not I put King Charles, but just the first, or I didn't put the first.
Yeah.
But if he was the first king, like if he's the first King Charles, then isn't he just King Charles?
I'll think on that one. Okay, good point. See, we're thinking. This is good. Okay, so in 1660, Charles II, who was the son of Charles I, was restored to the throne of England. So now King Charles II. Who did William Penn inherit that big land grant from? King Charles II. Same person, okay? Now, what happens after an old car? Oh, this is perfect. So Megan here has found an old car. It was disrupted during the Civil War of Rustation, or whatever it was when this lady had it before Megan. So what did she do with that car after she took it out of that Civil War period? What did she do with it? She restored it. And England was restored as well, and as a result of all the disruption during that unrest in England, when they crowned King Charles II, King of England, it began what was called the Restoration period in England. Same as you restoring your Maverick, they were restoring the country of England after that Civil War, which led to Charles I being beheaded, which led to Oliver Cromwell ruling England for nearly 10 years. In 1660, when Charles II was restored to the throne of England, this period of time that he took over was going to be known as the Restoration period, where they were going to restore England back to the way it should be. Now, Carolina was not North and South Carolina when it was first formed. It was just Carolina, and it was created in 1670, and it was named after King Charles II. So, Carolina, which started as one big colony, was formally created in 1670, and it was named for King Charles II.
Why?
Why?
Why isn't it Charles instead of...
What's that?
Like, why is it Carolina? Is that your middle name?
We'll get to
Father's
it.
name?
Now, here's what Charles II did. He granted 8 Lord Proprietors the right to set up colonies in America. This is how Carolina got started. King Charles II granted 8 Lords proprietors the right to set up colonies in America? Now they had a plan. Let's see if you can pick this up. So again, Carolina was named for Charles II, was formally created in 1670, and it started when Charles II granted 8 lords proprietors the right to set up colonies in America. What's a lord's proprietor? Englishman who was going to be a proprietor or owner of these colonies. Now you know what the proprietor's goal was? Why did they do that? They were doing it like everybody else to make it. They weren't running from anybody, were they? They weren't like people in Mass, the Catholics, right? They wanted to make a little money. And how were they going to make their money? They were going to grow food. And who were they going to sell this food to? The sugar West Indies. Those people that were working the West Indies that grew only sugar. Remember they imported their food from the mainland? Well, that's what these lords proprietors had in mind. That they were going to grow food to provide to the sugar plantations in Barbados. And they also were going to make wine, silk, and olive oil and send that down there too. So their plan was to make some profits off of the sugar growing in the West Indies. So the proprietors hoped to grow food, provide the sugar plantations in Barbados and the West Indies, and they also expected to export out of there some non-English products like wine, silk, and olive oil that they were going to send down there as well. So they were hoping to make a profit here. Okay? Now, Carolina did prosper big time. They developed a very close economic tie with the sugar islands of West Indies. Their plan worked pretty well. They grew these crops. They sent them to the sugar islands in the West Indies, made good money, dealt with wine and silk, those types of things, olive oil, and their plan worked pretty well. Now, many of these original Carolina settlers, where did they come from? They didn't come from England. Where did they come from? What's that?
Jamaica?
Where?
Jamaica.
Close. They came from Barbados. So a lot of these early settlers to the Carolinas were those small farmers that got ran out, we talked about yesterday, by greedy sugar lords. And they were the ones that actually made up most of the population of the Carolinas, of Carolina at this time, were those people, those small farmers from Barbados. What they bring with them, we talked about it yesterday, not only did they bring themselves, they brought what with them? Slave trade. So there was a vigorous slave trade established in Carolina. I'll tell you, big time, one of the biggest slave areas. Who else were enslaved? Ironically, who else were enslaved besides blacks from Africa in the Carolinas? Who else turned out to be slaves?
The indentured servants?
What?
The
The
indentured
blacks from
servants?
Barbados?
Indians. Indians also became slaves. The Indians that lived in the area became slaves as well.
How did they get the slaves to come over from Africa? Were they just
They
like,
went and got it.
they just like captured them or like
Didn't like
Hey, that's a good question. These people weren't treated like human beings. They were treated like animals. It's like you'd go over to Africa and capture animals or shoot animals.
No, that,
Oh, go ahead. Okay, so anyway, so there was a vigorous slave trade in Carolina, included Indians. At one time, as many as 10,000 Indians were dispatched to lifelong labor. 10,000. And guess where they came from? Guess where these 10,000 went, where they came from? Where did these 10,000 Indians from Carolina go to be slaves? The West Indies. So they were actually brought out of the Carolinas, 10,000, and they were dispatched to lifetime labor in the West Indian cane fields and sugar mills. So they actually sent Indians from America, so to speak, to the West Indies. That isn't the only place. These Indians from Carolina also were sent to New England, in the New England area. And the little tiny colony of Rhode Island actually had more than 200 slaves, Indian slaves at one time, in that tiny colony. So the slave trade that resulted from Carolina's influence of the West Indies and the Barbados Slave Code not only touched black Africans, but also American Indians. Yeah.
I just have a question. I know we refer to it as America, but at this time it wasn't called America yet. was it?
Colonial America, yeah.
Okay, I just didn't know if they called it that.
Yeah, colonial America. Colonial though, okay? So they grew crops and they grew crops and they helped the West Indies eat, but they actually had a crop that was considered an exotic food in England that was first grown in Africa, that the Carolinas started growing as a bigger cash crop, kind of a luxury crop. And they sold it not so much to feed other people in the West Indies, but sold it in Europe. What was that crop? No? It was considered an exotic food in England, very successfully grown in Africa. What's that?
Pineapples.
Not a lot. I don't think a lot of. I think people eat it. If you go down to the Chinese restaurants, you'll have some.
Bamboo.
Egg rolls.
They don't grow egg. Rice.
Rice.
I
Rice.
said it, I just said loud.
Oh, continue. Rice. Now, think about this. The Carolinians decide that they're going to start growing rice because they see it as a luxury crop they can make some money on. And it really had good success growing in Africa. Therefore, who cultivated that rice in Africa? Black people. So because of the Carolinas choosing rice as a cash crop, they paid premium prices for West African slaves. Okay? Why would they feel like they had to get West African slaves? First of all, they were very experienced in what? Rice cultivation. Yeah.
So when they got the slaves from Africa, wouldn't they sometimes like hire one of the bands of African groups over there to go get the other ones,
Yeah.
and it caused a bunch of war?
Yeah, they did. We may get to be more of a world history topic, but yeah. So one of the reasons they went to Africa and got these slaves after they decided to grow rice is because one of the slaves were very experienced in rice cultivation. Okay, where do you plant rice?
Wet.
Wet, swampy areas. And it's very hot in Carolina. And what type of disease can come from that? Malaria. So another reason they went and got African slaves to cultivate their rice is because the slaves had a very strong immune system to malaria. They were around it a lot, and they developed an immune system to that. So another reason why these Carolinians went to Africa or went and got slaves in West Africa is because, of course, these slaves were very experienced in rice cultivation, but they also had a very strong immune system to malaria. Okay, how many people like to work in hot weather? A lot of people don't. These people were used to it. So another reason they went and got them is they were ideal laborers in hot conditions because they were used to it. They were ideal laborers in hot situations, conditions. So because of the Carolinas were paying premium prices, because of rice growing in the Carolinas, Carolinians were paying premium prices for West African slaves. Why? They were very experienced in rice cultivation. They had a very strong immune system to malaria. They were used to working in very hot areas. And as a result of that, by 1710, the majority of the population in Carolina were black slaves. The majority of the population in that colony were black slaves. Yes, Mason?
Now, what was the cost of a slave usually?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe we'll do some research on that. This time, we'll do some research on that. Now, getting away from the slavery a little bit, because I think you get the point, what was the busiest seaport in the South? Not just in the Carolinas, but the South, because of this trade to the West Indies. What was the name of the seaport? Charlestown at that time. Not Charleston, Charlestown. Became the busiest seaport in the South. And who was it named after? King Charles II. Okay? So the busiest seaport in the South became Charlestown, also named after the king. Now, here's where religion came in. After the Carolinas were settled and kind of got themselves going, they were considered to have good religious tolerance, which means they would give you the freedom of religion. So after that was established, the colonies were established, they got on their feet, they got a reputation for having high religious tolerance. So because of that, especially Charleston, by the way, because of that, what did people do from England? Moved over to Charleston, and it became a very big, strong, diverse community, very colorful, became very powerful. And because of that, Carolina was one of the strongest colonies that we really had at that time, most successful. Problem is, they brought in the philosophy of slavery. Okay? And this is kind of interesting. This is going to lead us to our own Civil War here in a few years. Several, but not, well, I guess not that many, from 1760 to 1860. In about a 100-year period of time, the slavery issue is going to be a big issue in our country. Okay, that'll take us to our next subtopic, which is the emergence of North Carolina. How the Carolina was split into two colonies. Okay, the emergence of North Carolina, because right now, it's only one. Now if you look at the map right here, here's South Carolina and here's North Carolina as we see it today. So this whole area here was the Carolinas. What's on the northern border of Carolina at this time? Virginia. Okay, so keep that in mind. So the northern part of Carolina bordered the colony of Virginia. And from Virginia drifted down the following. Okay, think about this. The northern part of Carolina bordered the colony of Virginia. And coming down from Virginia into the northern part of Carolina were ragtag, poverty-stricken outcasts. Okay, so from the older colony of Virginia drifting southward into what we know now as North Carolina was a group of what they called ragtag, poverty-stricken outcasts. What might be the term for those people in our society today? What?
Congrats.
Really not a very appropriate term. If you ever heard the term white trash? Huh? What's that? No, I think they were more, I don't think they were hobos. I don't think, what somebody else say? Hoodlums. They were just kind of low-lifers, you know what I mean? They didn't fit in with the philosophy of Virginia. So basically what you had here was a big group of ragtag, poverty-stricken outcasts. We might refer to them today as white trash, which isn't appropriate, but you've heard that before. And they also were religious dissenters, those that did not want to abide by the religious views of those in Virginia. So they weren't probably the most awesome people that you'd want coming down into your colony. Now you want to know what Virginians referred to these people as? I believe it's on your ID sheet. Does somebody want to read it to me?
Quintessence.
The what? Go ahead.
Quintessence. Virginia's discontent.
What does that mean? Quintessence. What's that mean? Or most typical example. Yeah. Okay. So if they're referred to as what?
Ragtag, poverty-stricken.
Yeah, but what do Virginians call them?
The quintessence of Virginia's discontent.
Yeah. In other words, the most typical example of Virginia's discontent. So is that a very high recommendation? No. Basically, Virginians are saying these people are the perfect example of who you don't want in your colony. Those are the people coming into North Carolina. Well, it's kind of interesting because Carolina was more interested in what part of Carolina? Especially where Charlestown was. So these newcomers to Northern Carolina were really considered squatters. They had no legal right to the land. But regardless, nobody really bothered them. So they raised their tobacco and other crops on small farms. And because they were small farms, they did not need slaves. So they just kind of left them alone. Now, if you think about this, I'm trying to word this the right way so I don't get in trouble. If you think about this, what do you have between North Carolina and between, they're not yet colonies, but the southern part of Carolina and Virginia, what do you have on each side of these low-lifers, so to speak?
High lifers.
What? What'd you say?
High lifers. Rich people.
Yeah, or aristocrats. Okay, so these people are kind of sandwiched between people that didn't really see eye to eye. So they're located between aristocrats. Those are upper class people. So there's a lot of friction. Okay, can you imagine if you are a really nice person and you are a really nice, no, this is not being negative, and you're a really nice person, you have this discontent between you having to sit in class and you hate each other. How comfortable would it be for anybody in these three to sit in this classroom if you didn't, put the person you hate the most right between you? That would just be friction all the time, wouldn't it? That's what they felt in Carolina. We got these low-lifers between us and the perfect Virginians. So really, there was a lot of friction. Finally, North Carolina, because of the differences of opinion, was officially separated from South Carolina in 1712. Who did that? King Charles, yeah. He could see this wasn't working, so he separated the two, and they each became a royal colony, North Carolina and South Carolina. So they didn't have to worry about getting along with each other because they had their own colony to make up their own rules, so to speak. See what I mean? Okay, so it worked better. So King Charles could see that. So finally, in 1712, after a lot of friction between the two areas, North Carolina being between the aristocratic Virginia and South Carolina, he finally separated them, gave them their own royal colony in 1712. Now it's kind of interesting because North Carolina and Rhode Island